Hello everybody, Raven Knight here, and welcome back to our Bible study series going through the parables of Jesus. If you have a Bible, and I really hope you do, go ahead and open up to Luke 7. We're going to be in Luke 7, verses 36 through 50, and if you haven't, guys, I do want to say this, if you haven't read Luke 7, take some time this week to do so. Luke 7 is an absolutely fascinating part of the Bible, one of my favorite parts of Luke. It tells three different miracles that I think are all phenomenal to witness, and this is the third one in Luke 7 that I really want to go into. It's going to be a great time, and this is a parable, guys, that I think everyone should really take some time to analyze. It's very short. It's one of the shortest parables that Jesus ever told, but when you understand what Jesus was trying to get across in it, it has so much meaning. But before we get into all of that, thank you guys for coming. If you are brand new to this, welcome. I am the Raven. I'm Raven Knight. And every Sunday, I partake in a Bible study with you guys. I work through some parts of the Bible and share my faith with you. It's something that I want to do. I don't make any money off of it. This isn't monetized. I just want to share the faith, and I genuinely hope, I pray that the Lord speaks to you through what I have to tell you today. This is a really wonderful opportunity for me and for you guys, so please take some time to check this out. And if you want to hear some more stuff, I have whole other playlists where I've done other Bible study series with you guys. Feel free to check those out. And if you are a veteran, if you've watched these before, welcome back. Glad you're here. Hope you get something good out of this. Okay, so let's get started. So we talk about grace a lot, especially around this time of year. You know, you get Christmas coming along, and we like to think about things like Amazing Grace. Y'all heard that hymn before? Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. We talk about grace a lot, but I don't think we fully understand the full power of grace, what it really looks like. You know, we like to think about grace in terms of small things. You know, like, I'll give you an example. This happened to me a couple months ago. I was out eating, and while I was finishing up my food, the waitress comes by, and I look at the waitress and I say, "Hey, I'll take the check when you're ready." And she goes, "Actually, the gentleman over there paid for your meal." That is grace. See, because he gave me something. He took a burden off of me for no other reason than because it was out of kindness, it was love, respect, whatever you want to call it. He did something meaningful for me for no other reason than he could. That's grace. I didn't earn it. I didn't deserve it. I didn't do anything for him or to him that made him want to do it. It was just a kindness. It was a gentle, good thing. And that filled me up. I was like, oh man, that was so nice. It was so nice of him to do that. And that is a small idea of grace. And today we're going to take a look at what grace can really do. Today we're going to look at a parable that actually discusses grace and how we respond to it in terms of what God's grace looks like. This parable, like I said before, is very short. It's one of the shortest Jesus ever told, but it is one of the most powerful because it exposes three fundamental truths to us about the nature of grace. So, like I said, take a look in your Bible, Luke 7, verse 36. Luke 7, verse 36. And let's dive into this. So, let's read together. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with them, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. Now, to paint you a picture of this, like, we need to get a better idea of this. We don't know why this Pharisee, we'll learn the Pharisee's name is Simon. We don't know why the Pharisee invited him. We don't know why. Odds are good it was for self-righteous reasons, though, for self-promotion. Jesus was becoming a very popular figure in the area, and he probably thought he could get some clout off of it, or maybe get Jesus to bless him or praise him in some degree if he could see how lavish and awesome his home was. Now, this dinner was sort of an open event. People were allowed to kind of hang out, observe, and see what was going on. And you'll see more of that in a moment. Now, note the part where it says reclined. This is important. Reclined is actually the correct word to use here. Jesus was probably laying down or resting at the table with his feet away from the table. This was common because they didn't use a lot of chairs at this time. What they did was they had a very low sitting table, almost like a coffee table, and you kind of just reclined at the table with your feet away because your feet are the dirtiest part of your body. Because you wear sandals at this time. We don't have closed-toed shoes. We have sandals, and your feet get dirty as you walk around all day. Everyone wore sandals, so your feet are stinky, dirty, unclean. You got stuff in them that we won't even go to. So you want to keep that away from food. And that is all very important as we go forward. Please keep all that in mind. Okay, let's go to verse 37. Okay, y'all ready? A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. When she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. Okay, so a couple things to take from this. A couple things. This woman who lived a sinful life, I'll give you a translation. She was a prostitute. That is the most likely explanation of that sinful life. She was probably a prostitute, a local whore, and everyone knew her. She hears Jesus is at this house, right? This prostitute hears that Jesus is at the house of a Pharisee. She isn't walking by and noticing this. She hears he's there, and the first thing she does is go home and grab her alabaster jar of perfume. Now, this is not a cheap jar of perfume. This is probably worth a ton of money. But she takes it with her to see Jesus. Now, she then walks into the house of a Pharisee, a keeper of the law, and she's a prostitute. She does not belong here, and everyone knows it. But she walks in. She walks up to see Jesus, stands behind him crying. She kneels at his feet and wets Jesus' feet with her tears, wipes his feet with her hair, and she kisses them as she pours perfume on them. Again, I should reiterate, the feet are the dirtiest part of your body. You don't know where those feet have been. And she's kneeling behind Jesus at his dirty feet and kissing them. Do you know where those feet have been? Like I said, she's also let down her hair, which is scandalous at the time for a woman to do. Guys, everything happening right now is awkward. Everyone seeing this is like, what is going on here? That's kind of the major reaction going on. And Simon's about to point that out. Because if we turn to verse 39, let me flip over the page. In verse 39, read with me. When the Pharisee who invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. So Simon's not pleased. He's not impressed. And he even points out to himself that if Jesus was really a prophet, he'd know how awful this woman is and would tell her to get lost. But Jesus now has a response for Simon, and that's when we get into the parable. Okay, so everything we just talked about was set up. Everything we've talked about is set up for the parable. Y'all ready? Here we go. Here's the parable. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii, and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. Now, here's the best part about this parable. Simon probably has no idea what Jesus is talking about. And all the while, he's probably got his eye on the prostitute who has not stopped kissing Jesus' feet. Jesus is about to give an elaboration to this parable, and it's golden. But before we jump into it, can we just appreciate how simple this parable is? I think we can all understand the premise. You have 2 people who owe money to somebody. One owes 500 denarii. And to keep in mind, denarii is about a day's worth of wages. You work for a full day in this time period, you get about a denarii. So owing 500 denarii is like owing 500 days worth of pay. Over a year's worth of your salary. So one person owes 500 denarii. The other just owes 50. But the moneylender forgives both of them because they can't pay. So the moneylender forgives both of them. Who loves the moneylender more? The guy who owed the most, right? We can all agree with that. We can all understand that, right? We get that. But Jesus has some points to make of his own. Ready for this? Pardon. Verse 44. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little, loves little. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. The other guests began to say amongst themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Okay, there's a lot to take from this. There's a lot to take from this, and we're going to break it all down. But first, y'all might be wondering, what was Jesus talking about there? When you enter another person's house at this time period, there are common courtesies that are expected. There's hospitality courtesies. One is that you wash your guests' feet. Again, the feet are the dirtiest part of your body. So it is only common courtesy that when you have a guest, you or a servant wash the feet of your guest. It's a polite thing to do. Then also, you give a kiss, like a kiss on the cheek. You see this in Middle Eastern countries to this day, good to see you, mwah, mwah, like just kind of a greeting kiss. He didn't do that. The prostitute did. Also, the oil on the head thing. This isn't as common, but one thing you might often see is, you'd put a little bit of a fragrant oil on someone's head, almost like giving them deodorant, saying, hey, I know you've been traveling a lot, you're kind of smelly here. We'll give you something to smell nice. So here we have Jesus saying, from the time we've come in, you haven't done any of these pleasantries for me. You haven't done any of these minor gestures of good hospitality to me. But this woman hasn't stopped. She's given me what little she has. She's cried on my feet, wet them with her tears, and cleaned them. She's pouring perfume on my feet. She's kissing my feet nonstop, despite how dirty they probably are. She loves greatly. Because those who have been forgiven greatly love greatly. Those who have been forgiven little love little. There are 3 points I want you to take away from this story. 3 points. The first one, and if you guys take notes, I hope you do. If you don't, it's fine. You're not required to. But this is something you may want to take note of. These 3 points. The first one, not everyone looks at grace in the same way. Not everyone looks at grace in the same way. Think about that for a minute. When we think about grace, let's look at it from 2 different perspectives. Let's look at grace from 2 different perspectives. One perspective is the story I told you earlier, where I was in a restaurant, someone paid for my food. That's grace. But the cool thing about that story? If he hadn't done that, it wouldn't have been a big deal. I've got money. I can pay for my own food. I bought a cheap meal. It was only about $13, $14 at best. I could have paid for that. So it's not a big deal. It's one of those things like, oh, that was a nice thing to do, but I could have gotten it. Let's try another look at grace. A more appropriate look at grace. This one's also a true story. Last year, tax time came around. I had to pay taxes. And I'll tell you a scary thing about being a YouTuber. YouTube doesn't take care of your taxes for you. You don't get any tax benefits from YouTube because it's a self-employed job. So when taxes came around, I owed a large sum of money, well over $1,000. I couldn't pay it. I could not pay it. I knew I couldn't pay it, and I was panicked because I knew that I wouldn't be able to pay my taxes. You know what my dad did? He said, I got it. I'll pay it this time. Can you imagine how relieved I was? Dad, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, you saved me, Dad. Because I was so scared that I was going to be missing my taxes. I couldn't pay what I needed to pay. I didn't have the money. I just didn't have it. Dad paid for it. So who do you think I'm more grateful for? My dad paying my taxes or the guy at the restaurant paying my meal? Yeah, it's the same thing as the story Jesus just told. Who is more grateful? Who is more grateful? I was definitely more grateful when my dad paid my taxes for me. And that is how we look at grace differently. Some people look at grace as, you saved me, man. That, oh my gosh, you pulled me out of the fire. Others look at it, that was nice. That was a nice thing to do, man. How do you think Simon looks at grace versus the prostitute? The Pharisee Simon looks at grace the same way I looked at it on the restaurant. Like, this Jesus guy, he does a lot of cool stuff. Definitely. I'd like to have him in my house. That'd be nice. He'd probably make me look good if he was in my house. I'll give him a nice meal. I'll show him off a little bit. Maybe we'll have a nice little conversation. I'll look really cool if I have him in my house. That's how he saw grace. This woman was me when I had to pay those taxes. Overwhelmed. How do you guys look at Jesus' grace? How do you see his grace? Do you see it as amazing grace? Or do you see it as, that's nice? A lot of us look at it as, that's cool. What Jesus did, that's kind of neat. I can get behind that. But we don't all look at grace the same way, and I think we need to understand grace. We need to understand the grace that God gave us. And we can understand that as we go into the second point. The second point. Ready for this? Write this down, if you can. Not everyone understands that they have a debt to pay. Not everyone understands that they have a debt to pay. Here's the reality. That parable that Jesus told, what do the two people who owe money have in common? What do the two people that owe money have in common? We got one who owes 500 denarii, the other owes 50. What do they have in common? They both can't pay. That's what they have in common. Doesn't matter if you owed 500, doesn't matter if you owed 50. Neither can pay. So even if you think, I don't owe that much, you still can't pay it. You still can't pay it. Let me be clear about the debt that we owe God. Let me be clear about this debt we owe God, because that's what it is. We owe a debt. We owe a debt. We have sinned. We have sinned. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Y'all are familiar with that verse. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Now, there are two ways we can look at that. Like I said earlier, looking at grace different ways. One way to look at it is the correct way, where we say, I can't pay this debt. There's no way I can pay it. I need salvation. I need forgiveness. The other way to look at it is the way Simon looks at it. He doesn't recognize the debt because he's one of these people, and you see this in a lot of religious leaders, who think, hey, you know what? I'm a good person. I've lived a good life. Sure, I've done some bad things. Absolutely, we all have. But as long as I keep doing good things, I'll just even it out. I won't owe the debt. So that when I face my maker one day and he pulls out those scales, my good deeds will measure up. It's all good. But here's the reality. You can't. This isn't a matter of, you haven't done enough. It's that you can't do enough. We see this laid out in Romans 6:23. It's a very popular verse. You probably know it by heart. For the wages of sin is death. The wages of sin is death. When you sin, what you earn, what a wage is, that's what a wage is. It's what you earn. The wage of sin is death. You have done wrong to God. You have done wrong in God's name. You have done wrong and sinned against the Lord. Your punishment now is death. And there is no good deed you can do to undo that. You can't pay this debt. It's not that you aren't doing good deeds. It's not that you haven't done enough nice things. It's that you can't pay this debt. It doesn't matter if you've only done a few bad things, if you only owe 50 denarii, and it doesn't matter if you only owe 500 denarii. You can't pay it. But there are some people in this world who don't realize that. They think, I don't owe that much. It's a small. I've only done a little bit of bad. I've only been bad a few times. I'll just do some. I'll give to charity this week. I'll go to church this Sunday. It's fine. It's okay. It's not. Simon is the kind of person, the Pharisee is the kind of person who does not recognize his debt. He doesn't recognize how much he owes. And remember what Jesus said, who loves the moneylender more? The guy who owes more or the guy who owes less? Well, obviously the guy who owes more, because he has a better understanding of his debt. He has a better understanding of how much he was bound to lose. The one who owes less, it's not as big a deal to him. Like, oh man, that was good. But then when we recognize what we were destined to lose, when we recognize what we might have lost, what the punishment was. Some of you today may not realize you have a debt to pay. Some of you may not realize that you owe something and you can't pay it. Some of you may not realize that God is the only way you can be forgiven of this debt. And I hope today you recognize that. The third thing that I want you to write down, third one, last one. Forgiveness is extended to everyone. Forgiveness is extended to everyone. You want to know what's so amazing about this story? Jesus forgiving her sins. Now, why is that important? Think about in verse 49. The other guests began to say amongst themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" They couldn't believe that. Who's Jesus to forgive sins? Let me tell you why that's a big deal. In the eyes of the Jews, and it's true even today, sins are wrongs against God. They are offenses against God. Therefore, only God can forgive sins. Jesus forgiving sins was seen as blasphemy, heretical, because they couldn't wrap their minds around the fact that Jesus was God. Jesus has the authority to forgive sins. They couldn't wrap their mind around that. It's too phenomenal. How could Jesus forgive sins? Who is this who can forgive sins? He doesn't have the right to forgive this woman. She's a prostitute. She sinned against the Lord. He can't forgive her. But Jesus did. Jesus forgave her sins, Now, here's the funny thing. If someone wrongs me, like if someone slaps me in the face, I forgive them for slapping me in the face. I can forgive them for slapping me in the face. But when someone sins against God, that's God's business. That's between them and God. Only God can forgive sins, but Jesus forgave sins. Why? Because Jesus is God. He has been given the authority to forgive sins, and it is given to everyone. He even says, whoever has been forgiven little loves little. Simon hasn't accepted the forgiveness yet, but it is still there for him. It's there for all of them. It's there for the guest. It's there for the prostitute. It's there for Simon. It's there for everyone. Jesus is not, Jesus is not being picky about who he forgives. What he wants you to do is accept it. This may sound ludicrous to you. This may sound crazy, but try to imagine this. Let's say that someone said, hey man, someone came up to you and said, hey man, I'm with the IRS. You owe $5,000 in taxes. It's a pretty big deal. Yeah, but good news for you. You owe $5,000, but we're willing to forgive all of it. We're willing to forgive all of it. Water under the bridge. You owe nothing. All you got to do is sign this paper and we forgive all of it. And then you respond with, nice, but nah, I'm not going to sign that. Are you sure? You sign this. Your debt's clear. You don't owe anything. Nah, I'm not going to sign it. Thanks anyway, though. You might think that's nuts. You might think that's insane. Especially if you don't have $5,000 to pay. But people do that with God. Every day. God had come toward, hey man, you owe me a big debt. Like you've sinned pretty badly. You've done a lot of bad stuff. You can't pay this. But don't worry, my son, Jesus Christ, my son, died on the cross for you, and he wants to forgive you of your sin. We want you to have a relationship with me. We want you to be cleared of this debt. All you got to do is believe in Jesus. All you got to do is follow him. All you got to do is put your trust and faith in him, and we're clear. We're good. No debt, no punishment. You'll get to live for eternity with me. How's that sound? Thanks, man. Appreciate it, but no. Are you sure? We're extending this offer. It's pretty awesome. Nah, I'm good. Thanks. Again, that sounds crazy, but people do it. And part of it's because of what I talked about earlier. They don't understand grace. They don't look at it the same way, and they don't realize they have a debt. Do you understand the importance of this parable now? Do you understand the importance of recognizing the difference between the prostitute and Simon? This prostitute, who has probably lived a very worse life than Simon has, who's probably lived a horrible, horrible life filled with sin and awful behavior, she saw the grace of Jesus for what it was and was so overwhelmed, she came to him in a place she was not welcome, cried at his feet, wiped the tears away with her hair, and kissed his feet repeatedly while pouring perfume on them. She was overwhelmed by his love, by his grace, by the forgiveness. Simon didn't even extend courtesies to Jesus of hospitality and say, here, let me wipe your feet, Jesus. Let me do that for you. Here, glad you're in my home. Didn't even do that much. And he's looking at her going, what is she doing? That's so gross. Why is Jesus letting her do this? Because it is out of grace. And Jesus said what it was. It is her faith. It is her faith that has saved her. Her faith in Jesus Christ. Her faith in the promise. Her faith in what Jesus offers. One last thing I'll leave you with, and then I'll let you go. Y'all have probably heard this before, but good deeds do not save you. Good deeds do not save you. And I hope you got that from this sermon. Behavior isn't what saves you. Belief is what saves you. Faith in Jesus Christ. Do not fool yourselves into thinking that as long as I'm a good person, as long as I do good deeds, as long as I'm nice, I'll be saved. Because I'll tell you the truth, you don't have what it takes to pay this debt. Guys, this is a very heavy parable. It's one that I think is incredibly important, especially to our day and age. It's one that I think every Christian should have a better understanding of because it really does paint the picture of amazing grace. And I hope you guys got that today. Thank you so much for following me today. This was a great sermon. Not really a sermon, more of a Bible study more than anything. I'm no pastor. But next week is going to be very interesting. Next week, that Sunday, we'll be getting ready to head home. So I might be doing my Bible study a little earlier that day. And if we do, awesome. If not, we'll take that week off and we will see you when I get back from visiting family. And if it does end up happening, I hope you have a very Merry Christmas. I hope that you have a great time this holiday season. And I look forward to seeing you next time we convene. And I will see you when that happens. Take care, guys.